everybody. Welcome back to It's the Little Things podcast. I am so excited to say that oh my goodness, our guest speaker this week is Ainsley. And so I'm so excited. She is friends with Katie that was on 2 weeks ago. And she just recently wrote a book called Don't Date a BooBoo Dude. So I'm excited to kind of hear more about that and like your journey in that aspect. But Ainsley, why don't you tell us about yourself and kind of a little bit about your testimony?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to hang out.
Yeah.
So Don't Date a Boo-Boo Dude it was released August 2nd. So it still feels pretty fresh, but it was based on a real life experience that I had that is directly correlated to my faith today, my faith then, and all of the journey in between. So I was in an abusive relationship in my young adult years, I will say, somewhere in those early 20s. And I didn't even know that that's what it was. I just thought that was, I don't know. I guess I thought it was normal, even though I had dated other guys that like knew he wasn't like other guys that, it just was a little bit more intense. And I chalked it up to like, oh, he's just so passionate, red flag. But it ended up being one of the most freeing experiences of my life because whenever he broke up with me, I think it was just like one of those rock bottom moments where you're just like, okay, who the heck am I? Because I hitched my wagon to this guy for however long and I lost myself along the way. So who am I? What do I enjoy? What do I love? Again, and how do I rediscover my identity in Christ? So it really took me on a journey of faith and understanding my identity in Christ and what that looks like, within the church and at home, and just whenever I'm by myself. What does this whole world look like now that I have not attached it to a person or to someone who is unworthy of me attaching it to?
Yeah, for sure.
And then I was like, okay, like other girls have experienced this before. I know that's true. So how can I help other girls not go through this who might be in high school or college? And that is what this book came out of. That's what this renewed identity and faith in the Lord book came out of. All of these things were birthed out of this one experience. And I mean, outside of like, growing up in the church and having a big head knowledge of the Lord, this was one of the most heart-changing experiences that I've ever had, and that I'm endlessly thankful for because of what the Lord taught me through that lesson, even though it was awful to experience, obviously. But it taught me so much, and I'm able to, in turn pour out for other young girls who might be finding themselves in unhealthy or toxic dating relationships.
Oh my gosh, yes. I think that's one of the hardest things for me to it's especially when you're like friends with somebody who's going through that and you just want to tell them like, "Oh my gosh, like this is not good. Like this is not okay." But there's to a certain extent someone can only listen to so much you say until they have to make the ultimate decision themselves. And so I think that's something I struggled with, not necessarily with like, boyfriend girlfriend relationships, but specifically with like friendships. That's something that I can't find my identity in like who my friends are. Like that's something between me and the Lord. And I think that's something that's so hard in today's day and age because you see everything on social media and you see everything on like movies and Netflix and everything. There are just so many toxic relationships and it's so normalized that it becomes something that's a part of our day to day. And so that's such a hard thing to kind of break down and say, okay, you see this everywhere, but that doesn't mean it's okay. Right. And so I think that that's so awesome that you literally wrote a book about that and you're able to share that with other girls because that's something that young girls are going to come across and they're not going to know how to deal with it. And so that's awesome that you're able to like share that story with other people.
Yeah, it's very encouraging to see the testimonies that come out after reading the book, but it's also, just it shows me that I have my work cut out for me whenever I'm scrolling TikTok and I'm like, what are you like, whenever people post like the stories of their relationships or, a story time, da, 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 I'm like, no, I'm like, please let me send you this book. Like, you cannot keep living like this. It's going to be so destructive for everyone. Um, so yeah, the need is definitely there,
Yes.
sadly.
Oh gosh, it's crazy. And I mean, identity in general is like, whether it's in other things, not just relationships, is a huge thing that I've struggled with because, as I was a softball player and then it got taken away from me, I've realized once it was gone, I was like, oh my gosh, like who am I? What am I doing?
Yeah.
And so a lot of times you don't realize you're finding your identity in something until it's gone. And then you realize,
Hmm.
oh my gosh, like there's a reason that it got taken away. There's a reason that this is happening. And it's to kind of reroot yourself in Christ because when you find identity in things of this world that are constantly wavering, your identity is never going to stay the same.
Right.
And so if you find your root your identity in Christ, you're never going to have that issue because he stays consistently.
Hmm.
But I think that's crazy. But what is some advice that you would give a girl that might be in a toxic relationship that she's like trying to find herself in?
I think that one of the most valuable things that I did after we broke up, which I think anybody can do at any stage in life. You just have to be open to kind of doing it. Is I reintroduced myself to the Lord and I asked him to show me who he sees.
Mm.
So I literally kind of went into the throne room in my mind and I've like extended my hand and I was like, hey, I'm Ainsley. What can you tell me about myself? And he's like, yes, I know. And these are all the things. And it was just such a beautiful moment of reintroducing and re-identifying and taking my worth back that I had just given over to whoever, in whatever circumstance. And I think that anybody can do that at any stage in life. But if you're specifically in an abusive relationship, it's going to help so much because all of the things that you might be being called or I remember all the names, that I was called. Well, the Lord is directly opposing those names. He's calling you good and loved and valued and worthy and a treasure. Whereas I would, list all the other names that you're being potentially called in an abusive relationship and they just don't match. But the creator of the universe is saying the good things. And that's the voice that you want to tune your ear to whenever you're in that kind of situation or any person, of course, but especially if you're in that situation, because then you'll start to understand the beauty of the person looking back at you in the mirror whenever you're, immediately starting to pick her apart because your abuser is picking her apart,
Mhm.
but the Lord's not. He
Mhm.
wants to pick her up and put her back together. And whenever she sees the whole person in the mirror, it is so life giving and it is so refreshing that it kind of just makes you understand the beauty of God's creation within you. And
Mhm.
that will change your life.
Mhm.
That will show you that you don't deserve to be treated the way that you're being treated. That will show you that you have handed over something that is too valuable for a human to hold, that you do have to take it back and give it to the hands of the Father or lay it at the cross and return back to Him because He does not want, He doesn't want abuse in your story. He wants restoration and freedom, and that is available.
Mm, that's good. That's really good. I that's something that is so funny that you say like reintroducing yourself because I mean that really makes sense because you kind of know this faith growing up. At least this I've talked about this before, but you're raised in a faith and or
Hmm.
some people. And so you kind of don't have that faith for yourself. And so for me, it was like when I got to college, I had to, oh my goodness, like actually who am I? Like what's my
Yeah,
relationship with the Lord? And individually and not just like my relationship with the Lord based on my family. And so once I started
totally.
actually reading the word for myself and actually listening to sermons and taking notes and not just going to church on Sundays, but actually investing my time, I realized I don't necessarily agree with all the things that I was taught when I was younger. And there's things that but basically, yeah, I was like reintroducing myself. I said, this is actually who I am. I'm not lying. I'm not going to start, sugarcoating it with you. Like, these are my real issues. These are my real struggles. I have been abused. I have been treated poorly. And that stops today. That stops now. I'm
Yeah.
going to stop
Yeah.
telling myself these lies, because ultimately someone tells them to you and then you just keep hearing them in your head. And so then
Yep.
eventually you're abusing yourself because you keep reminding yourself of like how horrible you felt. And of course, you can only control so many of your thoughts. But once you start like deterring those thoughts away and you take hold of your thoughts, you realize, oh my goodness, I have way more power over my thoughts than I thought I did. And
Mm-hmm.
that's something that's changed my way of thinking, because ultimately I listened to Becoming Something, a podcast by like JP Pokluda. Awesome, awesome podcast. But they were talking about like forgiving what you can't forget and stuff like that. And that was
Mm-hmm.
so crazy to me, because he was right. He's like, you can't just forget something, but you have to ultimately forgive in order to move on, because the Lord forgave you. And if you decide not to forgive them, like what kind of person does that make us as Christians if we can't forgive even though we've been forgiven?
Yeah.
And so that's been crazy to me, is just realizing you're right. Like the person that hurt me the most, I can't just sit here and remind myself of all the bad things that happened, because that's worse on me than it is on them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's so crazy to me. It's just crazy how powerful your mind is, because once you start telling yourself all the things that the Lord's been telling you all this time, you realize
Mm-hmm.
how great it is. And you're like, why was I telling myself this? This is not true at all.
Yeah, it changes everything. It changes everything about your confidence, about who you believe that you are, and how you let people treat you moving forward.
Was the process of writing a book, was it a tough process having to like relive all the things that you had gone through? Or was it kind of like
Mm.
freeing to be able to write all that out and get it off your chest?
I think that probably both. I think I've talked about it so much in my work with young adults and college students and high school students that it wasn't like traumatizing to relive it. Plus, I've been through tons of counseling and therapy, so I recommend that for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Uh, but it was kind of strange to put it on paper, and then it goes through an editing process. So then someone else puts their eyes on it and says, well, could you phrase this a certain way and that a certain way? And you're just kind of like, wait, but this is the story, like it just,
Mhm.
it's interesting whenever other people are involved in the process of you telling your story. I think it came out really great. Like, I'm very thankful for my editing um, team and just everybody who helped me with this project. But it is kind of crazy when you pour your whole heart into pages, and then you kind of have to change X, Y, and Z about it, and you're just like, wait, it's just weird. It's just crazy. It's the whole process is just weird. But I love it, and I think it's worth it, and I really believe in what it turned out to be. um so yes, it is terrifying that my grandmother can pick up a copy of this book anywhere, but overall, for the greater good, everything I do is for the next girl. So if the next girl can, skip this hard lesson and take the easy route for this one thing, then it will be worth it.
That's so good. I that's kind of like the premise of the podcast, is like why I started it. I was like, gosh, I have too much that I've been through that I need to like, that I wish I would have had somebody telling me what I'm able to like talk to people about. And so I was like, it's so nice to be able to do that, knowing that I didn't go through all of this for no reason. Like this could be helpful. My
Totally.
story could be helpful. Everybody's story is, and that's how I see it. So I think that's so cool that you're like, it's for the next girl. That's such a that yeah, that's just good.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
for like, I guess for that healing process, is there like in the book, did you talk about like, I know it's kind of more than just like step by step, but what would you recommend if somebody is like post and like even like a year after everything happened and they're still having problems? What would you recommend?
Yeah, after they are out of the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that what I did that was so helpful in the healing process is that I asked for forgiveness for the people around me, because I hurt the people around me when I isolated myself, or whenever he made me isolate myself. Um, and I started rebuilding broken bridges and rebuilding connections with my friends and my family that I just totally ignored whenever I was in this relationship. And I think that that was one of the most healing things, was to kind of go back and be like, I know that I was not, I know that I'm the survivor in this abusive relationship, but I also know that I have some responsibility in the relationships around me that I need to go, revisit. And I need to rebuild my community, because community is just so extremely powerful. And that is one of the best things that you can do for your healing process, I think, is re-engage your community, face what you may have done or misstepped in this process,
Mhm.
and get your people back. Outside of that, I mean, I was literally in the church anytime the doors were open, because I was like, I need people to pray over me. I want healing. I was relentless in my pursuit for freedom. And I think that you owe it to yourself to be relentless in your pursuit of freedom,
Mhm.
because that is what the Lord has for you. There
Mhm.
is freedom on the other side of the hard work and the counseling and the rebuilding those bridges and all of these things, taking your worth back and placing it in the Father's hands, who is the only hands worth holding it. Um, all of those things are, so you just owe it to yourself.
Mhm.
You owe it to yourself, to your future kids, which I know is probably a very long way in the thought process, but it's true. I mean, I have a daughter now and she's 7 months old, and I'm like, I can't imagine what her life would be like if I wasn't healed,
Mhm.
you know? So
Yeah.
you just owe it to yourself and the people around you and your future kids, um, to heal.
Yeah. No, I think that's so good. And I think, what you said, you were relentless about finding your freedom. I think that's so something that feel like is not really talked about enough, because I think we're just expected after we go through something just to instantly have like this freedom and this relief and this peace. And ultimately,
Oh
that's just
gosh,
not
yeah.
how it works. And
Yeah.
when, the Lord is so loving and merciful, but he is like, he wants you to meet him halfway. Like he wants you to
Yeah.
put it at his feet. Like he that's kind of the whole point of the relationship. It's like when you do break, like you said, it's like fixing those bridges. Like, hey, this has been rough between us, but I want to build this back. And so I think
Totally.
that's kind of how I see it too, because that was the way I, was able to heal after all of this stuff with my, concussions and stuff. I was like, I haven't talked to you in a long time, and I know I'm not going to get healing just yet, but I think I really want to work for it. And I think that's something you have to realize, is that freedom doesn't just come just because, like, you kind of got to put in a little bit of work, actually build that relationship with the Lord. And I think that's so, so good. And I just don't think I've ever actually been told that. It was something I kind of figured out on my own.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, for sure. I agree. And that's also something, like, you have to also realize that, which sometimes can be hard when you're in the thick of it, is that you do need freedom,
Mhm.
like, and freedom is available. It's just, sometimes it's just so hard to believe whenever you are in the thick of it, but it is available and you do deserve it. And whatever's going on in your life that feels toxic or unhealthy, we got to get it out of there. Got to
Yeah.
get it out.
What would you say are some red flags about toxic relationships? Just, not just like, I guess, boyfriend girlfriend relationships, but just in general, like what's something that you would suggest looking out for?
I think the number one thing is probably, well, there's probably two things that I can think of that come to my mind. First is anything that makes you feel less of yourself, or like you're not free to be yourself. That is definitely unhealthy and probably on its way to toxic, if not already toxic, depending on how much of yourself you feel like you have to shrink for
Mhm.
someone else.
Mm,
Um, that one is a really big one. If you feel like you cannot show up as yourself and be accepted and loved, then that is a problem.
mm,
And then the other one that comes to mind is uncommunicated or unmet expectations. Like, whenever you come into contact with these things, what is the reaction of the person? Do they want to meet you in this conversation? Do they want to talk it out? Or do they just kind of fly off the handle? Do they react, poorly? Do they lose their temper? That kind of stuff. Those two things are really things to look out for that you can catch early on
Mhm.
if you're paying attention, right?
Yeah.
Is those the reactions to unmet or uncommunicated expectations. Let's say y'all are supposed to go to a restaurant and the time gets mixed up. Well, how does that person react?
Mm.
Are they like, oh man, it'll be all right. Sorry, we just miscommunicated this time. We'll figure it out next time, whatever.
Mhm.
Or are they highly reactive, very angry, uh, telling you that you did something wrong to waste their time or, something that like that,
Yeah.
then that is definitely a red flag that they're not treating you right.
Yeah, for sure. And then also, you said you have a 7-month-old daughter.
Yes.
Congratulations. That's so
Thank you.
exciting. But I
Yeah.
was curious, like after a relationship like that, how is the adjustment kind of getting back into a relationship afterwards?
Oh yeah. I think that for me it wasn't incredibly difficult. I didn't necessarily like lose trust for other people because but I know that that happens a lot. So one thing that I kind of recommend is not putting someone else in prison for someone else's crime.
Mm.
Like you don't have to accuse that person of doing something that they haven't done. They haven't necessarily broken your trust. So I would always encourage people to lead with trust and lead with love and give someone the benefit of the doubt, even if you don't know them, extremely well,
Mhm.
because they just don't deserve that.
Right.
They don't deserve going to prison for someone else's crime. So getting back into it, I think not only that, I would say lead with trust, but don't play games. I
Mm.
literally was like, okay, I've already been through this insane relationship. Like moving forward, I'm going to tell you how I want to be treated. I'm going to tell you what I expect. And if you think you're not capable, then that's totally fine. Bye. Like, ain't no thing. No hard feelings. We can be friends or we can never speak again. Doesn't matter to me. We're all good. And it was, I met my husband about 6 months after that relationship. And I remember thinking like, oh gosh, like I hope this is it, but I'm also terrified if this is it. Like I don't know. There was just so many things, but he was a little bit nervous to commit. Like he was like, "Oh, I don't know if I want to. We can just stay in this talking phase forever." He's like, had a lot going on. He was considering a move to New York City, so he was just like, "I'm not sure if I want to commit." You're asking a lot right now, and I was like, "That's fine. You don't have to commit to me, but I'm gonna go." Like, no problem. Totally feel you. You've got a lot going on. I've got a lot going on. So like, if this ain't it, it ain't it. And on the inside, I'm like, oh my gosh, 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 oh my gosh. Like I
Yeah, for
so
sure.
wanted it to work. I was so nervous. But I was like, I have to stick to my guns because I am worth it. I am worth someone committing. I'm worth XYZ.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, he said, okay, yeah, I want to commit. And not only that, but 6 months later, oh no, wait, we started dating. Yeah. And then 6 months later, he moved to New York. And then 6 months later, I moved to New York.
Oh.
So it was a whole
Mm.
thing.
That's
But
so exciting though. That's
yeah,
such a fun story too. And I think that I mean I like how you said that because Katie touched on that a couple episodes ago about like just being upfront about how you show people how you want to
totally,
be treated by the
totally.
way you allow them to treat you. So like upfront, if you're honest about it and then they do it and you're just like, okay, that's it. Like I told you I didn't like that. I told you I didn't want to do that up front. I was honest with you. But I think that's the hardest thing is the upfront honesty. So like how do you kind of go about that? Are you just kind of like flat out like, hey, this is it? Or do you kind of start it with a conversation? Like that's like a
It's a
hard
good question. It is like nerve wracking, first of all. So like if it's like nervous, you have a little shake in your voice, like that is so normal, like no problem. Um, because like I said, like in my head, I was like, oh no, please don't leave, please don't leave, please don't leave. But out loud, I was like, no, I deserve someone, who's willing to call me his girlfriend and take
Mhm.
me on dates. Like that's what I deserve. And that's true. So if you, first of all, consider what you're asking, you're probably asking for the bare minimum. Like this is not very difficult. So know that you're asking for the bare minimum and don't be afraid to ask it. And yeah, I mean, I think it could start with a conversation, or you could just lay it out and be like, look, here's the deal. I'm just letting maybe not on your first date, but like by the third, you could be like, okay, I'm just going to tell you where I'm at.
Mhm.
I think you're really cool. Love hanging out. But I'm not trying to play games. So if you think that this is going to be too much, you can make your exit now or not, or we can just continue to see how this is going. And it's not like I'm trying to pressure you to get married right away. It's just, I need some communication
Mhm.
and we need to be clear about what we're doing and how we're doing this and what it's going to look like, because the more fuzzy it gets, the more there's room for, you know, I don't know, just toxicity or just an unhealthy kind of atmosphere. There's a lot of room for that whenever there's not clarity or consistency. So I think you could come out with the gate pretty strong, or you can just be like, hey, where's this going? I'm not trying to get married right away. Or if you are, say you're trying to get married right away. There's nothing wrong necessarily with that, but just know your motivation behind it. And just be like, hey, this is kind of where I'm at. There's no pressure, but the ball's in your court. But the ball's actually in my court, but I'll pretend like it's in your court.
I love that because that's actually something that I did with my boyfriend now. We've been together 3.5 years because we're high school sweethearts. So like, wait until after college or whatever. And
Mhm.
so that was kind of what I did. And I did that with like any guy I talked to. I was very upfront. I was like, there is something that I just know I will never do. I was like, I am waiting for marriage. I don't care.
Yeah.
But I was like, I don't care. Like if you and I tell him, I'm like not mean about it. I'm like, if that's not what you want to do, if that's not what you believe in, that's totally cool. I just won't be in a relationship with someone like that because even if you
Yeah.
say you'll wait, but you don't believe in that, then I don't want to take my chances. And so I was
Right.
straight up honest and I have never had issues after that. But I do agree, like there are just so many things, but especially in high school, you don't necessarily know like all expectations. So it's been a process like over the 3.5 years, kind of figuring out what both of us want and what we expect. But for sure, especially in college, it's so important. I mean, I have friends that have had issues where they're like, I just wanted a Christian guy and he just, won't go to church and he won't do this. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, because not everybody's like, I guess idea of being a Christian is the same. So like you have
Yeah.
to set out
Lay
those
it out.
standards like, hey, I want to go to church together. I want to pray over our meals. Like I want to do all of that stuff. And so I think it's so important, especially in this world where most everybody's kind of living like if they're not Christian, they're probably, they just don't think the same thing, especially
Yeah.
we're just walking around and especially in the dating world, it's just so important. And I agree with you because you never know. You don't want to get a year into the relationship and then start being like, okay, never mind. Like I changed my mind. I don't want to do this, this, and this. And of course, communication can still happen then, but I agree. Setting the expectations beforehand saves a lot of heartbreak because there have been situations where I was like, hey, I want to wait till marriage. And they're like, I don't. And I was like, cool. I
Yep.
wasn't
See you
upset
later.
about it. I was like, I was
Yeah.
like, if that's what
Yeah.
you want to do, that's fine. But it saves so much heartbreak and it's helped me a lot. And that's definitely something that my dad taught me, like standards. Like you have to have standards. You will have standards. This is what he's doing. He will open the door for you. He will do this. And so it's, of course that was drilled into me, but then figuring out like it's okay if it hurts their feelings. They're probably a little bit too sensitive about your expectations anyways, because if you tell them that you want to wait for marriage and they get offended, there's a red flag in and of itself.
Totally. Totally. Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
like, just set it. Yeah, but I agree anyways, setting those expectations. But how would you suggest dating in today's world, especially as like college students? Because I know most of the people I'm talking to are college girls. So I'm like, They
Mhm.
probably need all of this advice.
Yeah, grab the book, first of
Yeah.
all. That will be a lot of information for sure. But I think dating with intention is always good because it gives you clarity
Mhm.
on what you want long term
Mhm.
and how you're willing to spend your time.
Mhm.
And it just kind of highlights those priorities. Now, I'm not the kind of person, I'll tell you this. I know that like it's very trendy to date for marriage. And I can't say that I did that. I cannot say that I dated for marriage, but I can say that I dated with intention. And what I mean by that is I was never trying to waste anybody's time. I was always trying to leave someone better than I found them.
Mhm.
And I was always trying to learn something from the relationship.
Mhm.
So it wasn't like reckless. Well, okay, early on, I probably was pretty reckless, but I would definitely not recommend that. But that was probably really helpful for the long-term clarity of what I was actually looking for whenever it came to, okay, this person, I'm pretty sure I could marry them. Let me, just think back. And is this something I can live with when I think about, the whole picture? Is this something I can live without? Like that kind of stuff. So dating with intention, I'm not like anti-apps, like you do you. I don't really, it doesn't really matter. I think that there's amazing people everywhere you look. So whether they're on an app or not, meh, I'm not against apps. So I'll say that. Um, I'm trying to think like what else is always helpful. I just think the more you communicate, your standards and your expectations, which require some reflection and some time alone, then the more quality date you'll have.
Mhm.
Also, do go on actual dates. I like date is like a four-letter word right now for high school and college students. And I'm like, bump
Mhm.
that, like change that. Like ask them to take you out on a date, ask them to hang out with you during the day. Like none of this, no. Like you deserve that. If you feel like you don't deserve being like hanging out when the sun is out, that's a red flag. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? So yeah, go on dates, go on actual dates, and they don't have to be high pressure. If it doesn't work out after the first date, it's fine. You had a good time, hopefully. Or you
Yeah.
didn't and you don't and now you know. You know?
Yeah, for sure. That's something that I've kind of thought about for a really long time. I'm pretty old school when it comes to, at least for, how I was with my boyfriend, but and that's cuz of course cuz of my dad. But basically that is something that nobody does. Like nobody actually goes on dates. Like
Nobody.
they're just coming out over to hang out. And I was like, for like your first time like hanging out,
Yeah.
like that's like a 2-year long relationship. You've been, like an old married couple. And I was like, but like y'all are first date and y'all are gonna
Yeah.
just, I don't know. That was always interesting to me too, but it's just kind of how everybody is. And it's also part of just like the culture that media has created too. So it's like
Sure.
everybody just is doing whatever they see. And I'm like, that's not because
Mhm.
how are you supposed to set expectations and tell them what you want and if they just don't know? Like if they're
Yeah.
like, hey, you want to come hang out at my house, but you actually want to date and you want them to bring you flowers, like how are they supposed to know that if you don't tell them? Like
Right.
or
Right.
or just don't, I don't know. There's like I could go on and on about how I feel like I agree. Like dates are so important and that's how you get to know somebody too. I mean, like sitting in
Totally.
a formal situation, how did they dress for like a really nice restaurant? Like, how were they ready? Did
Or
they
treat the waiter. How do they treat the waiter?
Yes,
How do they treat the people
yes,
around you?
yes, and that's so important. That's my biggest thing because that's how you can see how they were raised. And if they don't treat the waiter right, they're definitely not going to treat you right later on. Anyways, before I go too much off of a tangent, I guess we have to stop. But I just thank you so so much for being on here. This conversation was so good, and I got a good belly laughs in today. But thank you again so much for being on, and I will
Thank
be linking
you.
Ainsley's book in the comments and the everything and be posting about it because I will be ordering it right after I get off of here. But I'm so excited just to read it
Amazing.
and just kind of see, because now that I know you and your personality, I just know this book is going to be so good. But anyways, thank you so much for being on. Everybody, thank you so much for listening or watching or whatever you decided to do today. And just remember, be a light for the Lord in everything you do and be the reason someone smiles today.